welcome everybody. This is a webinar tonight on missing middle housing in Arlington seniors. We really appreciate all of you guys joining us tonight. Before we get started, I'm going to go through some basics and some administrative things. So let me first get started. By the way, my name is Michelle Winters. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Housing Solutions. So tonight we are talking about missing middle housing and Arlington seniors. So the very first thing to do when talking about that is to try to answer the question of what is missing middle housing? And missing middle housing is something that's defined generally as housing that is of the scale and type between single family homes and mid-rise apartments. This diagram is sort of the famous diagram that shows you what some of those types are. In our partnership with the Lee Highway Alliance, we recently produced a video that we would like to show you that helps explain things as well.
Lots of people looking for their next home are being squeezed out of Arlington. Young professionals are essential workers looking to buy their first home. Longtime Arlingtonians who want to downsize but want to grow old in their community. Many Arlington neighborhoods don't have the options that different households need. Modest homes in Arlington are being replaced every day. New homes are big and getting bigger. Prices are high and getting higher. The average price of a single-family home in Arlington is over $1 million. And in most Arlington neighborhoods, a single-family home is the only option. Arlington is becoming a place where only the wealthy can afford to live. But what if that big home isn't the only option? What if there could be something different, but very familiar? What if there could be something in the middle? Missing middle housing falls between single-family homes and mid-rise apartments. Missing middle housing brings variety, including duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, low-rise courtyard apartments, and cottage clusters. Missing middle homes fit in right alongside what we love most about Arlington and its neighborhoods: where we live, where we work, and where we play. Missing middle housing can help seniors downsize and stay in the community they love, help essential workers live in the community they serve, make it possible to have less costly homes and more diverse neighborhoods, and allow Arlington's neighborhoods to provide a place to live for every age and stage of life. Making room for the missing middle means more options in Arlington's future. For our teachers and caregivers, to support our local businesses' workers, for grandma, for your kids, and their kids who want to stay in Arlington. Missing middle housing isn't the solution to all of our housing affordability challenges, but it is an essential piece of a larger puzzle to help meet the needs of all Arlingtonians. Let's talk about how missing middle housing can make Arlington a better place. Visit missingmiddlearlington.net to learn how.
Great. So I turn my camera on so you guys can see me this time. You might also ask the question, well, why are we talking about missing middle right now? And AHS has actually been talking about missing middle housing for several years now. We held our first event on missing middle housing 4.5 years ago. It is something that we have been interested in for the impacts that it could have on housing options in Arlington. And but now currently the county is actually doing a missing middle housing study, and they are looking at exploring all the different types of missing middle housing and how these types could address gaps in Arlington's housing choices. And so this is a multi-year process. They started it in late 2020. We're in early 2021 now, and it will be continuing through at least the beginning of 2022. And only towards the end is when we'll start to see some recommendations. At this point, the county is doing a lot of outreach. You may have been to some of the meetings that took place in February, taking some input from residents, going to lots of meetings, and we are helping contribute to that by having events like this and creating the website missingmiddlearlington.net that you heard about in that video. So that's why we are having the conversation. I will now go over a few technical things before I introduce our moderator and panelists. So tonight you will have the opportunity to ask questions. We have the Q&A box is our preferred method, and that's the one that will be our go-to first. And there's a guidance here for how to access the Q&A box. It's in the Zoom control panel, wherever that might be on whichever device you're using. Looks like the picture that you can see there. And so if you're able to submit a question through the Q&A box, then our moderator and panelists can get to those most easily. If that is not working for you, we will also at the end of the evening provide an opportunity for folks to raise their hand, and we'll do some calling for some verbal questions, and we'll hold that to the end. So we'll be prioritizing the written questions in the chat if at all possible. So please do that. If there are any technical questions, please feel free to send the host and panelists a note in the chat box, although otherwise the chat is disabled. Feel free to follow up with us with any questions. There'll be a brief survey that you can fill out afterwards as well. So with that, I am going to invite our moderator, Maureen Markham, to come on board. Turn your camera on and your microphone. And Maureen, I'll introduce Maureen and then she'll take it from here. So Maureen is recently and happily retired from the Arlington County Housing Division. She has a very long history of working on housing issues in Arlington and around and other places, and including spending some time on the AHS board many years ago. She is a founding board member of the Arlington Neighborhood Village, which she can tell you about, which helps seniors age in place here in Arlington. So Maureen, I will leave it to you to introduce the rest of the panel.
Okay, so, well, first let me add my welcome to all the people who are participating. It's great that you could join us tonight and to talk about this kind of interesting and promising topic. So, you know, when as Michelle said, I used to do a lot of housing work, or actually around the country and working in various communities. I did a lot of market studies around senior housing. And of course, the question that you ask in a market study is, do you think that there's a need for senior housing in your community? When you ask it that way, everybody says, oh, yes. But if you ask people, if there was senior housing in your community, would you want to live there? Everybody says no. And that's because they really want to stay in their own homes as long as possible. And so when Arlington was starting up their Arlington Neighborhood Village concept, it was like a dream come true for me. So, and what we try to do, of course, is to provide support through volunteers to enable senior citizens to stay in their own homes as long as possible. And well, sadly, there comes a time, though, when you find that the house that you're in is just, for one reason or another, is just not suitable anymore. And then the question becomes, well, what next? And what are the options? And so tonight we're going to look at possibly that this idea of missing middle housing is something that can help us provide more options for our senior citizens as they kind of age in place in our own community. So Why is this important? Well, aside from the fact that seniors are just important and they would be important if there were just a few of them, the senior population is the fastest growing demographic in Arlington. And as you can see in this picture, in the next 25 years, the population of those who are 85 years and older is going to increase by 65%. And so that's the fastest growing segment of our population. So if we want to provide suitable options for those people to live happily and healthily in Arlington, we need to look at what our options are. So, I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our panelists tonight. So, are you should they put their videos on so we can see who they are?
Yes.
Yeah, there's Danielle and Erica. And so I'm very happy to say to you tonight that we have two very experienced and expert kind of housing folks on the panel tonight, both of whom are Arlington residents. And Danielle will be our first speaker, and she is actually the director of the Livable Communities initiative that is an AARP initiative. This keeps her pretty busy because she provides support to offices in over, 53 states and localities, so including DC, Virgin Islands, and one other one.
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico. So she has a wealth of perspective to share with us around livable communities. Danielle's an expert on housing and sustainable communities issues for many years, and she actually has previously held senior roles at HUD and the EPA, so she's well versed in public policy. Erica Wood is well known to many Arlington seniors. Erica was a former vice chair of the Commission on Aging, and she is currently a member of the Commission on Aging and the member of the Arlington Age-Friendly Communities Task Force. That's the task force that has come up with a plan that the county board has approved that addresses the issues of Danielle's initiative with the livable communities. So they're both going to share their knowledge and wisdom with us. And I will just remind you that if you have questions, you can type them in the Q&A box, or at the end of the presentation, you can raise your hand and we'll try to take some verbal questions. So, okay, so I think what the plan is for us to turn our cameras off except for Danielle, right?
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Maureen. Thank you for that nice introduction. And thanks to Michelle and Alice and everyone at Alliance for Housing Solutions to put together this session, which is such a critically important conversation. I'm so excited to hear from Alice, who's really on the front lines of this work. So it's just going to be a really vibrant conversation, and I'm so glad that we're having it. As Maureen mentioned, I am the director of Livable Communities for AARP. So it's a nationwide program. It's rare that I have the chance to sort of dig in deep on issues in my backyard. So I'm really just doubly delighted to be able to do so today. So I always start with this slide, which hopefully will come up here in just a half a second, which really talks about why we do this work at AARP. And it's not unlike the slide that Maureen just showed you all, which really talks about the demographic future that we're facing. As a country, we are approaching a day very soon, in 2034, when we will have more people over the age of 65 than we will have people under the age of 18 for the first time in our country's history. So that really, in my mind, is a pretty significant demographic tipping point that we are not so slowly approaching. It's very clear to us. It's very known to us. Many communities are already there, particularly rural communities where younger folks have left, and it's predominantly older adults. But Arlington is not immune to that trend. I mean, the statistic that Maureen shared about the incredible rapid growth in the 85 plus householder segment of our population in the next 20 years, I think is cause for, arguably it's cause for alarm. I think that we're not ready for that future yet. And what we'll talk about tonight is how we could get there. We've already seen a pretty significant growth in the 65 and older population. It grew 25% just in the last handful of years. So, these trends, we're not immune from them here in Arlington. And I know that when I talk to local leaders around the country, I always ask the question, are you ready for that future? Are we ready for that demographic future? And I think that it's pretty easy for us to conclude, based on the kinds of statistics we see today, that communities are not, that they're not designed with the needs of older adults in mind. And I'll run through a few examples of what I mean by that. First of all, we know there's a real mismatch in the kind of housing stock that exists and who we are as a country. So we are a country of more than 50% households comprised of one or two persons. Yet we are also a country in which the housing stock is 85% comprised of 2, 3, 4 or more bedrooms. We are a country in which the cost of housing is increasingly burdensome, particularly on older renters, eating into very limited, oftentimes fixed incomes, requiring upwards of 30% of their income in order to pay for housing. And we've seen the downstream effects of that as housing becomes less affordable. We are seeing upticks in the number of older adults who are experiencing homelessness. When you think about the housing stock again, and the degree to which it includes elements of universal design or accessibility features, we're seeing a real shortage, a real lack of housing options with those features, whether that's a zero-step entry, whether that's wider hallways, etc. In Arlington, that is very much the case as well. The same statistic source that we pulled those demographic statistics from earlier showed that 75% of Arlington's renters over the age of 65 are living alone, and 58% of people with a disability are rent burdened. So 3/4 of our older adults living alone are rent burdened. That means they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing. That's compared to a baseline of 38%. So overall, 38% of people are rent burdened. It is that much. It's almost double the rate of that for older adults 65 and above. That was in 2018. When you think about parks and public spaces, I think, these days, I certainly have a renewed appreciation for how valuable those are. I'm working from home. We welcome any chance we get to get outside and be among other people in a safe and socially distant way. But we know that older adults aren't using parks and public spaces as much as they could be, or as much as we would expect them to, given their share of the population. One study from a few years ago noted that only 4% of park users are older adults in communities where they represent 20% of the population. And that's, to me, that speaks volumes. That says we're not designing places that older adults feel comfortable in, feel safe in, feel included. It's a real wake-up call. We also know that when you look across communities, that not all communities are equally or equitably served by parks. Certainly communities of color, we learned last year, thanks to a great study by Trust for Public Land, that park serving community colleges are smaller, more compacted, more in demand, more crowded. And we also see the sort of downstream health effects of communities that don't have adequate green space. We know that temperatures get hotter in warm seasons, and that can have a very real health effect for older adults. Carrying forward the same notion, when you look at transportation, it's some of the same dynamics are at play. Trying to get the slide to advance here. Michelle, I might need your help. There we go. In transportation, it's the same dynamic. Older adults, we know, outlive their ability to drive by anywhere from 7 to 10 years. So just think about that for a second. We know that there will be 7 to 10 years of people's lives in the later stages of our lives in which you will no longer be able to drive. Are there alternatives? Are there alternatives that work for people, that are safe, that are accessible, that are affordable? Not necessarily. We know that public transit systems are largely already in crisis mode, and yet they are a critical source of mobility for people with disabilities, for older people, for people of lower incomes. We know that bike and pedestrian fatalities are on the rise. In fact, 2018, 2019 was the most dangerous year on record. and that older adults are disproportionately represented among those fatalities in 35 states. So again, we're not building the kinds of places where people can safely walk or bike as an alternative. And if you think biking isn't an option, I'll speak to that in a little bit. Isolation and loneliness are all byproducts of this built environment that we've created. And when you create a situation in which people are homebound, when people don't have the ability to get out of their home, don't have the ability to interact with others because they live far apart, or they live in a home by themselves, in a place where they're not going to easily run into people, it contributes to prolonged periods of loneliness, which we know now have very real health effects, not unlike smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which also not only contributes to one's physical health, also to mental health and to increase probability or likeliness of dementia. So what is there to do about this? Michelle, next slide, please. Sorry. If you could tick through these. Sorry, it's just not advancing on my side. There we go. A couple more. One more. Thank you. So what is it that older adults want in their community? We know that. We have a good sense at AARP. We did a survey a few years ago where we asked exactly that question. And true to Maureen's point, older adults want to be able to stay in their home. More than 3/4 of people over 50 say they want to age in their home or age in their community. The reality, though, is that fewer than half believe that they will be able to. And I think the reasons for that are many. One, the house isn't a good fit for them. Maybe they want to move to a warmer climate or near grandkids or whatever, but oftentimes it's because of the affordability, the accessibility, the maintenance requirements, the fact that the home is not a good fit for them anymore. We also posed questions to people about their what would they need to do in order to stay in their homes, and we found that over 60% of adults who own their own homes, about 1/3 of them would require major modifications to make their home more accessible, meaning things like adding an accessible bathroom, a bedroom on the first floor, and the like. We asked about, would you be willing to share your home? I just read a study the other day that said there's something like 45 million empty bedrooms on any given night in our country. Are there solutions where we could have people share a home? Well, we've learned that people are increasingly open to that solution. I think we live in a sharing age, right? You get in a ride share, possibly you stayed in an Airbnb before. This notion is beginning to take hold. And especially people are open to that if they see that they will have a need for help with daily activities. Finally, we also ask questions to folks about accessory dwelling units, which I'll get into a little bit, but ADUs is the term for what we would traditionally or conventionally consider a basement conversion or an attic apartment or a granny flat or a mother-in-law unit. It goes by a million different names. The shortcut reference point is ADU. We learned that only 7% of survey respondents have an ADU, but about 1/3 would be interested in building one, particularly for additional income, for help, or for companionship. Next slide, please. So that's where we come in, and that's what AARP really is poised, I think, well to be able to do, is to sort of take this insight and work directly to support local leaders to help think differently about their communities, to think differently about their housing, their transportation, their public space decisions, so that we're actually creating communities that really are welcoming and inclusive for people of all ages. We always start with the needs of older adults, but oftentimes the solutions that we land on deliver benefits for people in every age group. And we do that in a few different ways, and I'll walk through each of these one by one. Next slide, please. The first one is our AARP network of age-friendly states and communities. And you're going to hear next from Erica, who is one of our age-friendly champions here in Arlington. I believe we have Jane King in the audience, who's an age-friendly champion in Alexandria. The age-friendly network is an opportunity for any community, once they've recognized that demographic future, to raise their hand and say, we want to do better. We want to prepare for this future. And in doing so, they commit to a 5-year process of surveying the needs of older adults, developing an action plan, and then implementing against that plan based on these 8 domains that we've articulated. Some of those are built environment ones, the same things I've talked about: housing, transportation, and public space. But it's also a chance for communities to really explore things like information and communication. How are older adults getting their news? How are we communicating with them? Can that be improved? And inclusion and participation. How are older adults involved in civic life or in jobs or in volunteer service? How can we expedite that? How can we connect across generations to ensure that we are really harnessing the rich expertise and value of our older adult population? All told, more than 500 communities are in this network, as well as several states. And what we see is that it is very much an opportunity for a diverse coalition of folks, of entities at the community level to work together to really rethink how we're building our communities. Next slide, please. And again, you'll hear more from Alice about what's happening here in Arlington. Again, it's a multi-year process. Again, it starts with the community's needs. It moves into developing a plan of action, which is reflected here. I have a little screenshot of Arlington's action plan. And then there's several years spent implementing the plan. And again, this really calls on everyone from elected leaders to city staff to volunteer leadership to nonprofits like AHS and our Arlington Neighborhood Village, to our Chamber of Commerce, to universities. I mean, really, it runs the gamut of people and entities who get involved in leading this effort. Next slide, please. Another way in which AARP supports localities is by making direct investments in places. So we operate a program called the Community Challenge Grant Program, which we happen to be in the open application window for at this moment. This grant is awarded to municipalities and nonprofits to do short-term, quick action demonstration projects that help to build the case and demonstrate why these age-friendly approaches make sense. That could mean something like these examples from Richmond, where it's about building community gardens that are more accessible, that bring people together, and that maybe fill the gap in terms of food deserts for communities. In the case of the picture here with the bench and the public art, it's a way of celebrating a particular area, a region, maybe making it a little more comfortable to walk down that block. Maybe it's a way of celebrating the leadership that exists in that block. Maybe it's an opportunity to bring people of diverse ages together to paint the mural as a way of rebuilding and strengthening the community as a whole. Again, we're in year number 5 of doing this grant program. There have not been any grants to Arlington yet, but I'm hopeful that will change. Next slide, please. Because we've really seen some creative solutions around the country. Grants have been made in every state, almost 600 of them by now, including things like colorful crosswalks, temporary bike lanes, public art, ciclovia projects, which is kind of open streets, close down the streets and let pedestrians and bikes take over for a Sunday morning. Bike training programs, transit training programs. Next slide, please. Bike art installations, bike racks, accessible picnic tables, and the list goes on and on. So really, this is our way of investing in communities to make the case for why it's important and beneficial to really think about things from an age-friendly lens. Next slide, please. A couple other tools that we offer. We offer the Livability Index, which is a great way to figure out where your community is at right now. We map 60 different metrics and policies and illustrate what some things are that are working really well for the community and what some areas of opportunity are that remain. We offer a map that lets you search easily around the country to see what's happening elsewhere, where else age-friendly communities are that maybe look and feel like you, similar population size, similar setting. And one of the things I think is so great is that we offer a weekly newsletter, which is very much oriented towards practitioners, where we try to impart information that we've learned, that we've collected from our age-friendly leaders, from our national partners, directly into the hands of practitioners who are involved at the local level in improving the housing, transportation, public space, and community engagement on behalf of older adults. Next slide, please. We offer a whole bunch of publications. I'm going to walk through a couple that I want to draw your attention to. But again, this is, we are a free service available here. So you can download all of these publications for free. You can request copies in print for free. I've got my own little stash here at home that I often refer to, and we want local leaders around the country to do the same. So I'll talk about a couple. Next slide, please. The first of which is our walk audit. So the walk audit is something that we've been doing for quite a while now. This is a wonderful tool that we have seen our state offices, we've seen nonprofit groups, we've seen age-friendly communities use this tool as a way to get people out and get people together to walk around a community and assess just how safe or comfortable it feels. We've gone so far as to, next slide please, to develop some worksheets that can also be printed from your computer at home, so you could do this individually. But ultimately, what we're really doing is helping to guide people through a set of questions that let them better understand what works about their community from a pedestrian safety and comfort perspective and what doesn't. So it prompts people to ask and answer the questions. Are crosswalks clearly marked? Is there enough time to cross the street safely? Are there sidewalks? Are the sidewalks functional? Are they cleared? Are they too narrow? What are the things that get in the way of making your community a truly pedestrian friendly place to live? So I encourage you to check that out and make good use of that resource. Next slide, please. You can click through a couple of these bullets here. There we go. Thank you. Another resource that we offer is called the ABCs of ADUs. And I mentioned ADUs a second ago, and I think you saw some pictures of those in the video at the top. ADUs are a real gentle way of integrating housing into existing communities. I've got one in my neighborhood here that's being built right now. The only reason you could tell an ADU is popping up in their backyard is because there's an advertisement in the front for the builder. But otherwise, it looks kind of like a garage that's settled in the back of the parcel, but that ultimately will be a housing unit for someone. In many communities, I know when I lived in North Arlington, we had a basement apartment that we rented out to the teacher, the elementary school down the street. So ADUs really exist in communities, have historically existed in communities. For many, many years, they were illegal. Arlington County has done the right thing. They've made them legal. They've expanded the number that can be built. And what we see is that there are really, truly wonderful benefits that can accrue to older adults in building ADUs. There are a few different reasons for that. One, it can be a place for a family to invite an older adult to live with them. So, particularly with the nursing home crisis that we've seen in COVID-19, we've seen a lot of people, myself included, who've committed to their mom, I will never put you in one of those places. And if that means that I build an ADU in my backyard for you to live comfortably, we'll do that. So for some people, that's the solution. But the great news is that it can serve lots of purposes. It can be the place where people downsize who want to stay in their community but don't want to maintain their large home anymore. It can be the place where your caregiver lives, or where you place someone who you provide care for. It could be the place where your returning college graduate lives for a few years rent-free or low rent while they get their legs underneath them. So ADUs are a very flexible housing option. They really exemplify this kind of all ages benefit, frankly, that we expect to come from a lot of our age-friendly solutions. I will say AARP has a couple of resources on this topic, including a new model code that we've just developed and released. Next slide, please. And in this vein of looking at codes and zoning restrictions, I mean, ADUs are a perfect example of some things that are logical, that would be nice to have in communities that have been prohibited. In the same way, we looked at what are some of the zoning and codes that are in place, particularly around commercial districts, that may get in the way of them being more livable, more age-friendly communities. So we partnered with a group called Congress for New Urbanism to release this guide called Enabling Better Places, a Handbook for Improved Neighborhoods, that really begins to unpack some of those changes that can be brought to bear. And that might mean things like looking at where your parking is located, or to what degree you have shared parking solutions. It might look at your design regulations in terms of, are you allowing for big vacant walls to be constructed along corridors where you otherwise want people to walk? Because we know that that's a real disincentive for people to walk against a very long, very solid, impermeable building frontage. Things like that. We know that there are small code fixes that communities can undertake that are much easier to do than a wholesale code revision, zoning overhaul, but that really roll up to and add up to elements that can make communities more accessible, more inviting, more age-friendly, and more livable. Next slide, please. You can click through a couple of these too. Thank you so much. So another one, finally, I think this might be the last one, is our Home Fit Guide. And this is another one that I'm incredibly proud of. And I think it's exactly at the heart of this discussion tonight of how could we create housing solutions that work better for Arlington's older adults. We know that there are things that can be done in our homes today, regardless of your age, regardless of your ability, that will make your home a better fit for people of all ages. So we really are encouraging people to think now about what are those changes that can be made to a home before you need it, before the day comes when you are using a walker or in a wheelchair. We offer more than 100 sort of room by room tips that can be considered and implemented in one's home. Some of them are very low cost, some are no cost, others require some renovation. But this tool is something that we're very proud of, in part because we've recently revised the document so that not only is it more inclusive of all different housing types, so these strategies don't just work if you live in a big single family home, they also work if you rent or if you live in an apartment. And we also tried to make sure that it was very inclusive of all income groups, all races, all ethnicities. The document is now actually available in 5 different languages, which we're really pleased with. And one of the other new elements that we've integrated this time is we've woven in smart home tech to talk about how smart home tech can actually contribute and be part of a better home fit that allows people of all ages and all abilities to live comfortably in their home. Next slide, please. So this is a little peek of what it looks like inside. We use illustrations and we have very specific targeted things. Some are big projects like, move your microwave down to counter level instead of having it mounted to the wall, or redesign your hallways so that hallway doors so that they're a little bit wider, or think about that entry to your home. How could you maybe landscape it differently or construct some sort of ramp or threshold ramp, which is a much more sort of discrete solution to create a 0-step entry. But other solutions are much more sort of low cost, low tech. It's things like create storage by your front door so that you don't have a pile of shoes right next to your front door, because we know that those represent huge tripping hazards. It's things like tying back phone cords and lighting cords so that we're not creating risks and hazards that can really impede the safety and well-being of people of all ages who live in these homes. So encourage you to request a copy and flip through and find out what you could be doing in your home. Next slide, please. So this is where we get to the real meat of the matter, and where I'm so excited to hear from Erica. So I'll give you a couple quick highlights of what's happening from the age-friendly perspective here in Arlington and in Alexandria as well. So Arlington County, again, this is their action plan. You'll hear more about that in a second, but a couple of things I want to draw your attention to, which you'll hear more about. The Arlington County age-friendly effort is really grounded in this notion of enhancing public transportation, enhancing housing choice, improving pedestrian safety, all of these sort of elements that go into making Arlington a better place for older adults to age and to reside in. Alexandria, some very similar approaches. They both started from, again, surveying the needs of their residents and landed on some similar goals that they've articulated as a community. In Alexandria, the plan is to be more inclusive for aging communities of color, to also really advance and accelerate their Vision Zero commitment, which seeks to reduce and eliminate, frankly, pedestrian fatalities. Do new walkability audits, talk about how we can expand housing choices. So all of these elements kind of grew out of these age-friendly processes that took hold in Arlington and Alexandria as a result of their membership in our network. Next slide, please. But looking further afield in terms of some other communities, Des Moines, Iowa is another example. They've been an age-friendly member for many years now, and their approach is equally laudable and wonderful. They honed in on a need, to be very clear, for more compact, walkable communities with housing that's more affordable than the typical single-family home. And they were doing that both from the eyes of the perspective of older adults, but also for millennials. As a result, they were able to, and have really doubled down on this notion of increasing use of accessory dwelling units in their community, including building a demonstration ADU and working on changing the regulations. They also identified areas that have been historically underinvested, particularly places where there was a large 50+ population. And as a result of that, they were able to identify specific parts of the community that really needed more investment, more attention, more resources. Again, as a result of that focused effort, they were able to drive public dollars into those communities to really strengthen that missing middle market housing and services and amenities in those areas. They also looked at businesses to say, how can we encourage businesses to better serve older adults? They developed, as many other communities have done, an age-friendly business certification program, in which communities can sort of self-select to work on some of the elements that the community has identified as being of priority to older adults. Maybe that means having menus available in larger font. Maybe that means changing the hours. Maybe that means offering curbside service instead of requiring people to get out of their cars. Who knows? It's up to the community and the business to identify what those priorities are, but then older adults in that community know that their business is committed to them committed to making their experience a very good one. Next slide, please. I think this might be the last one. And finally, in Miami-Dade County, Florida, again, another really wonderful program. There's some great work. They've been at this a few years now. They're a county not unlike Arlington, much larger, several jurisdictions within it, however, and their focus was very much on transportation. So they identified, for example, that their older adults, particularly in parts of Miami, were very transit dependent. They really depended on using buses to get to groceries, to get to doctor's appointments, to get to social outings and church and things like that. But that having things like, not having bus shelters, not having clear signage, not having places to sit was actually an impediment for older adults in using transit more comfortably, more safely, more often. As a result, they were able to, among the many things they've done, they were able to successfully win a community challenge grant to install what they call age-friendly benches at transit stops, as a way of, again, making it easier for older adults to use this very important resource. While they're waiting for the bus, they now have a place to sit. But it's also a way of, again, providing more comfort, signaling the importance of transit for people of all ages. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, last one, Columbus, Ohio. And I like to include this one because it does have a village tie-in, actually. And I know Maureen represents Arlington Neighborhood Village. So in this case, again, among the many things that Columbus has done, and they're a fantastic example too, they actually piloted a program where when older adults are not able to get a volunteer ride from their village, which is part of the village solution, is that they often offer volunteer driver services. That village has a direct tie-in now to Lyft, so that the member of the village can call up the neighborhood village as per usual. If a volunteer driver is not available, they have already worked with Lyft and trained Lyft drivers to go out and be responsive to those needs. So again, for older adults who don't have a smartphone, who aren't using that to call up rides and who rely on the neighborhood village to do that for them, they've already created the tie-in there and prepared the Lyft drivers to really be in service of older adults. Next slide, please. That's a lot. I'm really excited to hear from Alice, but please, if you have any more questions or seek more information, feel free to check out our website, and I'm looking forward to the conversation at the end of this meeting as well.
Okay, so, well, thank you very much, Danielle. That's really, some interesting things, stimulates a lot of thoughts. And so now I'm going to turn the program over to Erica, who's going to kind of take those concepts down to our own Arlington level and kind of tell us what Arlington is doing in terms of the age-friendly task force. So I'll just say, take it away, Erica.
Great. Well, wasn't that phenomenal? Every time I hear about the National Age-Friendly Network of Communities, I just get dazzled, completely dazzled. So much creativity, so many activities going on all across the nation. And it makes me doubly glad all over again that Arlington has joined the AARP Network of Age-Friendly Communities. And also, it's very nice that Danielle lives right here in Arlington. So thank you for that. We're so glad. And my role, as Maureen has said, is to narrow down the focus now and look at how all of this plays out in our very own Arlington. And particularly though, and Danielle mentioned transportation, and all of those things are in our plan, but I'm going to hone in particularly on housing because we're looking at the relationship of the age-friendly plan to the missing middle housing. Last week, the Arlington Commission on Aging had one in a series of its annual highly successful community engagement forums on what matters most to older adults in Arlington. And you know, housing options are always high on the list. So I'm going to walk through a lot of information about the Arlington Age-Friendly Plan, and I think that you'll find that it will nicely mirror and echo a lot of the things that Danielle has said. In fact, some places complete repeats, and that's a good thing because it tells us that we're right on the track. So next slide. I'd like to go back to demographics and start with a slide that was provided for me by Rachel Coates of Aging and Disability Services Division. And if you look at this slide, you'll see that there are just over 36,000 older adults here in Arlington. And what you'll see is that the fastest growing population segment since 2014 has clearly been adults aged 75 to 84, which grew by a whopping 24%. And then the next highest is adults aged 65 to 74, which grew by 22%, far surpassing, in fact, dwarfing the rise in the younger populations by a change of plus 14% to plus 5% for the total population. Well, that's huge. And that underlies everything that we're talking about here today. So next slide. So as we all know, Arlington is a forward-looking community. And what you see here is Arlington's inclusive mission. And I know you can read, but I'm going to read it for you because I think it bears so clearly on everything that we're saying today. So it says that Arlington will be a diverse and inclusive world-class urban community with secure, attractive, residential, and commercial neighborhoods where people unite to form a caring, learning, participating, sustainable community in which each person is important. And interestingly, the Arlington Commission on Aging's vision is that Arlington is a community where older persons thrive, not just live, but thrive. Older persons thrive. Now, to me, both of these statements kind of call to my mind the inclusive and upbeat video that we saw at the beginning of this program on missing middle housing. Next slide. Because Arlington is a forward-looking community, in a very Arlingtonish way, Arlington began planning for the rise in the older adult population many years ago. And back in 2006, the county board created an elder readiness task force, and I'm proud to have been a member of that task force. And they produced an elder readiness plan, which has guided the Commission on Aging's priorities over the years and been very valuable. But we knew that the AARP Age-Friendly Network would really allow us to push forward, would really drive us further forward, and would put us in contact with communities all over the country. You saw Danielle's map. We wanted to be a part of that. So in 2018, with the county board's approval, Arlington became the 250th U.S. community to join the network. Now, I don't know what the number is now, Danielle knows, I'm sure, but there's a lot more than 250, but we were the 250th. And as a result of that, the Commission on Aging created an age-friendly task force to draw up a step-by-step age-friendly plan. And in 2020, the county board approved the Commission on Aging's age-friendly plan. And suddenly we were a part of a huge, not only national, but global community with so many benefits and so many resources and so many colleagues. So it's a good thing. It's all good. Next slide. Well, think about it this way. Arlington already is age-friendly, and the age-friendly plan simply takes steps, helps Arlington to take steps towards becoming even more inclusive and more age-friendly, along with all the wonderful activities of the Arlington Aging and Disability Services Division. And I could call out many names of wonderful staff who work on that. And you've already heard about Arlington Neighborhood Village and others. So no one entity can do this alone, but community partners are really the heart of the matter. The plan sets out strategies for 2020 to 2023. You heard Danielle say it was a 5-year process, but you have to think back, and we've already been in this process since 2018. The plan addresses the AARP domains of livability. So you heard Danielle say that there were 8 domains. Well, we've combined some of those, particularly in areas where we were already very, very active. And so we came out with 5 domains: transportation, as you've already heard, housing, as you'll hear today, participation and inclusion, community and health supports, and communication and information. And then the Commission on Aging realigned its committees such that each committee, each of the Arlington Commission on Aging's committees is responsible for the implementation, for not doing it all itself, but sort of providing some leadership and pulling together resources to implement these domains: the transportation, housing, participation and inclusion, communities and health supports, communication and information. I'll just stop here and put in a plug for a minute for the Arlington Commission on Aging committees, because they are not made up just of Commission on Aging members, but they also can include community members, be they organizations or individuals who are interested in working in these areas. And we welcome partnerships, both organizations and individuals. Next slide. So there again is a screenshot of the cover of our age-friendly plan. And next slide. So open it up and here's what you'll see. We're serious. So what you'll see is a bunch of big old charts, and what they are is charts of each of those 5 domains. So each of the domains sets out key goals, and each of the key goals sets out key objectives. And each of the objectives, for each objective, there is set out key actions, then the tasks needed to accomplish that action, who's going to do it, by when, what support is available and needed. And here's an important one: results and measures. What are the inputs? What are the outputs? And then in that last column, you'll see the desired outcome. So AARP is very big on evaluation, and so are we. We take it very seriously, and we try to track the inputs, the outcome, the outputs, and look towards really making a difference in people's lives, which is what the ultimate outcome is about. Next slide. So tonight I want to narrow down those 5 and look at the housing domain, the housing component of the age-friendly plan. And so the vision is for older people in Arlington to live in or remain in the home of their choice. And you heard what Danielle said about it's the desire of a large percentage of older people to remain in their home and community. But we'd like to say in the home of their choice, because that's where we want them to be. And we want them to be in the county if that's where they wish to be and live and remain. But there's significant challenges, of course. The rising housing costs, the rising cost of housing in Arlington. So if an older adult wants to downsize or remain in Arlington at a price they can afford, where will they go? And even if they can afford it, can they get into it? Can they get up the steps? We know that much of Arlington's housing stock is old. We know that Arlington is hilly. Some places it's really hilly, and there are a lot of steps. And sadly, though, even the new housing is being built right now as we speak at the top of a lot of steps. So we have both old and new housing stock that's not accessible. So the idea is to look at how to expand the housing options for older adults in Arlington County. Now, you heard Danielle mention the AARP Livability Index, and I want to show you what it looks like for Arlington. So next slide. Okay, here's what it looks like. This is not an eye test. I know it's difficult to see, but I wanted to show you what it looks like. Now, our total index score is 65. Now, if you were taking an exam in school, 65 would not be a good grade. But here in the Livability Index, it is a good grade. But if you look at the numbers underneath, you'll see that they vary. And those are the different aspects and domains, and they each have a different score. So for example, look at health, we've got a 95. Look at engagement, we've got a 67. But then look at housing. Guess what we've got? 47. And that is, of course, is pulled way down by the lack of affordable and accessible housing. So we've got our work cut out for us. Next slide. So under the housing domain of the age-friendly plan, the mission is to create housing policies and programs that enhance 3 key goals. Affordable housing, so housing that older people can realistically purchase, downsize, or modify. Accessible housing, housing that people can get into and live comfortably in. And affordable assisted living. So when older adults need more care, it needs to be available here in Arlington and at an affordable price. Market rate assisted living comes at a huge cost, and we'll hear more about that in a minute. Next slide. Okay, so let's dig down deeper into each of those housing goals, looking first at housing affordability. And I want to run through 4 specific objectives in the housing affordability goal. The first objective is to identify options for home sharing. You see the echoing with the national, with what Danielle said, and again, that's good. That's as it should be. So this home sharing could be either unrelated older adults living together. Everyone always thinks of Golden Girls, or it could be intergenerational, as with older homeowners and university students. So home sharing can bring social connections and companionship. We've really heard a lot, practically every day this year, about isolation. And here's a way to combat isolation and help older adults who are cost burdened. Home sharing can also be a kind of support and give a sense of safety. So, someone is there in case of an emergency. Someone is there. There are, we learned, a growing number of initiatives nationwide to help pair older adults with a housemate. And the age-friendly plan will look at county policies and best practices of other jurisdictions. Now, interestingly, the second objective under the housing affordability goal is to increase the supply of missing middle units. The age-friendly plan was drafted before the missing middle housing study, but we knew that expanding a variety of middle options could really help older people in Arlington to find a way to live affordably. Why not the bottom unit in an accessible townhouse? Why not an accessory dwelling unit or a ground floor courtyard apartment? And then the fourth objective under the housing affordability goal is, well, no, I skipped one. I should go back to the third one and say the third one is to advocate for policies that reduce the financial burden on older adults in need of housing. And for example, the Arlington Real Estate Tax Relief Program, the Arlington Housing Grants Program that provides rental assistance to low-income Arlington residents. So those are very important in looking at the whole plan and the whole picture. And then the fourth objective is to promote the development of accessory dwelling units, ADUs. And let's go to the next slide. As Danielle said, ADUs are smaller, independent second dwellings on single family lots. They have their own living, bathroom, and kitchen space, and they can be either attached or detached. And you saw some of those in her pictures. They could be used for an older relative or friend. They could be used for the older person, him or herself, to live in. And again, you've heard terms like granny flats and so on, mother-in-law units. Or they could be used to rent out and provide rental income for the older adult. So have a lot of flexibility. In 2019, the county board adopted new ADU standards for Arlington that that provide for additional flexibility, particularly as to detached ADU units, new detached ADU units. So you might have seen some of these ADU, at least the detached ones in Arlington. If you look closely, I kind of make a game at trying to spot them, and I look for a small house on the lot of a bigger house to see if I think perhaps that's an ADU, perhaps not, but keep your eyes open. Next slide. So this slide shows some graphics, some configurations of different accessory dwelling units and how they can be either detached or attached in different parts of your house, the attic, the garage, the basement, the porch, you know, whatever. And then there's some additional examples. So very interesting concept. Yeah. So moving to the second housing goal, it's housing accessibility. And so again, affordable housing won't do you much good if you can't get in it or get around in it. Now, by accessibility, we don't mean simply compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, although obviously that's very important, but we really want to go beyond this towards universal design. Now, universal design means a place that is safe and livable or usable for everyone, regardless of age, regardless of physical ability or circumstance. And it's not just ramps and grab bars, but even though you might not be able to see it, it's features that make life easier and remove unnecessary barriers. It's that shelf near the door to put down heavy packages, or it's the levered door handle that makes it a lot easier to open, the wider door, the pull-out drawers, the stairway lighting, and much, much more. The age-friendly plan aims to promote awareness and use of universal design in both new and rehabilitated housing. And I'm going to run through two objectives, two approaches by which it will do that. The first is through the Site Plan Review Committee. And the Site Plan Review Committee is a committee of the Arlington Planning Commission, and it reviews certain proposed site plans. And the age-friendly plan envisions that we will track some of the housing issues that come before the Site Plan Review Committee, and that Commission on Aging members or age-friendly partners could serve on certain site plan review committees to make sure that their voice is heard, their input is heard. And beyond that, interestingly, under the plan, the Commission's Housing Committee is compiling a universal design checklist for use by the Site Plan Review Committee to make sure that these issues get on their radar screen so that they're brought up for consideration and discussion. Then the second objective under the accessibility component of housing is the dissemination. So it has to do with home universal design and home modification. If you are an older homeowner, and what are some of the kinds of things that you can do to make your home safer and more usable as you or your relative ages? And you've heard already about a lot of those, from the very simple and no-cost items up to more expensive home renovation. The Commission on Aging has produced what I think is a really kind of snappy universal design home modification video. And you can see the link there. It's on the Commission on Aging's website. And I'd recommend you take a look at that. I think it will give you some ideas. And what you see here is a screenshot near the beginning of the video of a woman who's using a wagon to bring some items into the house and really benefiting by some of those universal design features. So we want to get this video out to older homeowners, realtors, developers, architects, and more, because it doesn't do any good unless it gets out there into the community. So next slide. Now, I wanted to say a word about walkability in Arlington, and I know that the time is passing, so I'll start to wrap it up, but we do have couple more important components. Walkability is not per se part of the housing domain of the age-friendly plan, but it crops up in several other parts throughout the plan, and it clearly bears on housing access. Arlington already is highly walkable, and it's in fact recognized as a gold walk-friendly community. And the plan envisions the monitoring of streets, walkways, and open spaces to make sure that they're safe and that they're easy to use by everyone. Examples of this could be eliminating those troublesome brick pavers that are so difficult for canes and wheelchairs, ensuring sufficient lighting and signage, and even recently there was talk of those bright orange See Me crossing flags at various intersections. So next slide. So the last goal, and I want to spend a moment on this, the last goal of the housing component of the age-friendly plan is affordable assisted living. It's important to know that nursing homes receive significant federal dollars in Medicaid funds, but assisted living does not. And consequently, there's a real scarcity of, it's almost an oxymoron, affordable assisted living, a real scarcity of assisted living, and almost all of it is market rate housing, which can be very expensive. I saw a recent Genworth estimate of the monthly cost of $4,400 with additional costs and fees for additional services. We're lucky in Arlington that we have two affordable assisted living residences called Pepper Garden and Mary Marshall, but beyond that, we have only market rate assisted living. Here you see a picture of Sunrise of Arlington on Glebe Road. Well, we want to make sure that long-term care residences, that is nursing homes and assisted living, are considered part and parcel of Arlington's housing stock and planning for affordable housing. We want to make sure that they're on the radar screen. Next. And the specific objective in the plan is to get the county to require developers to set aside 5% of units in new assisted living as affordable units. And by affordable, we generally mean that the developer accepts the state local payment for assisted living SSI eligible residents called the auxiliary grant. And it's really an important concept, that set aside. And our closest neighbor, Alexandria, has been able to get some developers to make those set asides. And so we're hoping that we can do that too, through tools such as the auxiliary grant program, maybe in conjunction with other programs, the site plan review system, getting the issue of affordability on the radar screen, the Affordable Housing Investment Fund, even though those funds that are given by the developers don't come back directly to the assisted living, there may be some ways that can be used, and the current review that's underway of the Affordable Housing Master Plan. So last slide. You can see that there are many intersections of the age-friendly concept in our Arlington age-friendly plan and the missing middle housing concept. You can see that AARP is very supportive of missing middle housing, and that the Arlington age-friendly plan incorporates the concept right into its plan, and that the age-friendly plan emphasis on affordability and expansion of options clearly aligns with the missing middle concept. So in closing, I'll just say once again and put in a plug for community partners. We can't do this alone. We'd like your ideas and your voice, either your organizational voice or your individual voice. So please let us know. Thank you.
Okay, so well, thank you for that, Erica. It's again brings up a lot of thoughts about that are Arlington specific about how we could do that. And there are there's some questions in the Q&A, and then that I would like to pose to you, and kind of fits in with questions that I have for myself too. So there's one question about the bonus density that the board has approved for senior facilities, and whether the question is how many seniors would be expected to want to live in facilities like that. And I think that really intersects with a question about seniors wanting to stay in their own homes as long as possible, and my question that goes with that to you is given the missing middle kind of options, which of those options do you think seniors in Arlington would find most attractive to live in or most acceptable? And given that, we have a range of seniors, we have a whole demographic of seniors that currently live in their own single family homes, and those homes might be quite large and lots of steps and things like that. We also have other senior citizens and who may tend to be lower income people who do live in apartments and mid-rise kind of facilities and even high-rise facilities now, who would have a different kind of concept about what might be acceptable for them as they are thinking about, the next step and aging into that. So I'd like to ask our panelists, both Danielle and Erica, what perspective you have on those particular questions. So,
well, I'll start off and then maybe Danielle can add. So to me, it all comes down to options, and older people are as different as any other from each other as any other population group. So it's hard to say older people want this or they want that, because and it's I shouldn't even say older people they, because I is one, and we all have different desires and experiences and histories. And I think what I feel we're aiming for here in Arlington is a range of choices. So some people do want to live in congregate facilities. And that's what maybe their parents did, maybe they had a good experience, maybe they want to be with people in that kind of congregate setting. Others would never want that, and others may want something in between. So my whole mission, I guess, is to expand the options.
I couldn't agree more, and I think you said it absolutely perfectly. And I want to apologize to Erica. I think I referred to you as Alice a couple times, so my deep apologies. But I don't think I could have said anything better. We at AARP, we are all about giving people more choices and more options. And I think one of the reasons that missing middle housing fits so nicely into an age-friendly framework is because we can clearly see that there are inadequate options now. When you first mention AARP and housing to people, I can guarantee you that their mind goes first to age-restricted housing developments, these large, 55 plus communities, or nursing homes, all of which are fine, but those are just two of many, many, many different housing solutions that really are going to be available and should be available to help meet the needs of older adults. That the slide that I showed back in my presentation, where we talked about 3/4 of people wanting to age in place, but only 46% of them believe they'll be able to. 13% believe they will have to move to another home in their same community. And that, again, that may be for economic reasons. It may be that they can't afford the large home that they've always lived in. Maybe their spouse passed away. Maybe the retirement income is not what they expected. Who knows? But again, if we're able to provide options for people to downsize according to their needs or according to their wishes, then we're better able to give older adults the kind of life that they want at that point in their life.
And I think I would add too that affordability is really important there, because even if there may be options, if people can't afford them, they may be thinking about, I may have to leave Arlington. I'd like to stay in Arlington, but I don't think I'll be able to because of the affordability issues.
Exactly. Yeah. what I failed to mention was that 46% think they'll be able to stay in their community. 13% think they'll have to move to another home in their community, and a quarter of people think they'll have to move somewhere else. And again, that may be by choice. Maybe you want to have, sunny days in Florida or be near grandkids or something. But it's a shame to think about the fact that people who lived in Arlington all their lives have so much to contribute to Arlington wouldn't be able to see a viable path forward to remain in Arlington. That's a real loss for our community.
Exactly. I would hate to think that we here in Arlington, who aim to be so inclusive, are forcing older people out instead of providing the affordable and accessible options that they need.
Right. So, so this may be a question that maybe Michelle might know the answer to. This was in the context of the county doing the Affordable Housing Master Plan update, and assuming that that's going to look at senior housing and kind of these issues that we're talking about. Do you think they'll do any kind of like surveys or studies of seniors to find out how many you would like to live in a missing middle kind of building, and what might be most attractive to them, or if they're open to doing that, or so that we know?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. So either as part of the Affordable Housing Master Plan review that they have recently kicked off, which does have a component about aging in the community and aging in place, or as a part of the missing middle study itself. I know that the county has mentioned that they have a lot of engagement steps and processes that they're expecting to go through over the next year. One of the next steps that we're expecting them to launch into in the next month or so is to start asking about what different types of missing middle housing are of interest to people in the community. And so my guess, and I don't know this for sure, but my guess is that they would be doing some form of an input tool, based on those types, and that they would be collecting those preferences. And yeah, exactly the point, and maybe we'll give this to them as a recommendation, that they not only collect what things people are interested in, but who is it that are interested in those, and why, because this the needs for seniors are a little bit distinct, particularly with regard to things like universal design, which I think is a really big opportunity for some of the missing middle housing types, particularly anything on that first floor really has a great opportunity to be something that provides universal design options.
Right. Okay. Danielle, did you have something that you wanted to add to that?
I was thinking as Michelle was talking, that another one of the real attributes and I think assets of missing middle housing is it kind of opens the door for these unique designs, land use designs, site designs that currently are not very common in this area. And I think about things like in the video, cottage cluster development was mentioned, cottage neighborhoods, where if you can imagine a parcel that might otherwise have, a couple very, very large single family homes, if you can reimagine that parcel as being a little sort of courtyard with common space in the middle and smaller homes around the edge. If those are smaller units that are designed to be affordable, that are designed to be accessible, that are designed to house many of our 1- and 2-person households that we know are going to live in our community, already do live in our community, but they're designed specifically to facilitate that kind of connection in common spaces. That's a real opportunity that is kind of underserved right now. We see historically, places like Colonial Village are great examples of that. Used to be commonplace. It used to be commonplace to design, locations that foster that kind of connection across residents, which goes directly at the heart of the isolation and loneliness trends that we're seeing. If we design and reimagine sites differently, we can engineer more interaction among people and across generations that ultimately really enriches the lives of everyone who lives there. But it doesn't happen easily with the existing zoning codes now. In fact, there's a lot of disincentives to doing that. It's far more risky for developers. It's more time consuming. So it's just easier to build the single family detached homes in the way we have for the last 50 years. But the fact is, we know now that we can do better and we need to do better.
Danielle, I think that's such an interesting point. And all year during the pandemic, we've heard about social isolation and technology, and how technology is helping to address the isolation. But nobody has said that changes in zoning would help. And, getting that on the radar screen, I think, would be huge.
I mean, you could go a step further even, and there's examples of co-housing developments where whole parcels are literally designed to allow people to have individual homes, but to also have a common area where they, dine together as a group, maybe share cooking responsibilities. So that's next level communal living, not for everyone, but shouldn't that be an option? Could it be an option? Because for some people, that's really going to suit their needs very well. It might suit very well the needs of an older adult who doesn't want to have to cook for themselves all the time, and maybe is willing to tutor kids who live nearby, and it's going to work really well for maybe the single parent who needs an extra set of hands to mind their kids at the end of the day.
Yeah, whether it's technically co-housing, or if it's just multi-unit housing where you've got a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, having those people in that unit be able to help each other out on occasions is one of those community building aspects of this kind of housing that I think we could all potentially look forward to. And I will just mention that I found out that Alexandria has started a co-housing study in their planning division. So that's something that maybe we should learn a little bit about.
That's great.
Right. Well, and your point about that interaction, Michelle, and it's not just social interaction, but if people are living nearby or in a position to be able to be sort of looking out for each other, because one of the things about growing old in a single family house that is kind of removed from all your neighbors is that people don't know if you've had an accident, or you've fallen and you're in your kitchen or your bathroom, and you could be there for days before someone would know. And so that's a serious issue. So there's a question about when we're talking about going back to the idea that there might be some zoning changes or something like that. But a question about does AARP generate any talking points that we could use to kind of engage and inform and persuade developers to support this, or to actually build this kind of housing, and with knowing that one of the reasons we get these large McMansions built is because they're quite lucrative for developers.
I will say that we offer a lot of resources that can be that are certainly available to developers. And what we've seen is for example, particularly with ADUs, which really fit very nicely the business model of smaller architecture firms, smaller builders. I mean, the big production builders, the Lennard Homes and KB Homes and things like that, are not necessarily going to be the ones who come into our community and build ADUs. But there are a whole raft of builders out there who work at a much smaller scale, for whom we've very much had in mind some of the resources that we talked about. So one that I didn't mention is something called Making Room, which is a publication that we produced with the National Building Museum a couple of years ago. And for those of you who made it down to the Building Museum during the time of the exhibit, what the exhibit did was it actually presented really fantastic images and floor plans and site designs and cost estimates and quotes from builders of a whole range of housing solutions that better meet our demographic future. So this book is basically all about missing middle. It has a specific call out on missing middle, but it really makes the case that the housing stock that we have currently and are likely to have for the next many years doesn't match who we are as a country. And so I think by putting things in terms that developers and builders can understand and frankly can see themselves in, these examples show that they're marketable, that they can be built. You can make it past the zoning and the permitting and the variance requirements. You can make a buck off it. It is feasible to develop these housing alternatives. I think things like this go a long way in convincing builders that they can be part of the solution. And then similarly for the ABCs of ADUs guide, which I mentioned, part of what we hear so much is that is that builders are interested to do this work, but leery of the NIMBY effect, right? They are unwilling or maybe disincentivized to undertake a different kind of housing solution, the construction of the housing solution, because of the potential delays that can come from NIMBYs, from people who don't want change in their communities, which is, again, I think really where we at AARP can be helpful. So when we created this ABCs of ADUs guide, it was both to help builders and local leaders explain to area residents how ADUs can fit in, what the historical roots are. You know, if you reflect on, if you remember watching Happy Days, the Fonz actually lived in an ADU above Mr. Cunningham's garage. So these are business models these are building models that we've had in our communities for decades. And by working with communities, I think builders have been able to show that we can reduce some of that fear and that anxiety that otherwise might be the case in a community when a builder wants to do something different.
Okay. Well, I'm very mindful that we're quickly running out of time, and we do have more questions. I have at least, let's see. There is, there's a raised hand. So Rosemary, do you have a question, and do I unmute? Does she unmute? How does that work?
I just asked her to. There she is. Yes.
All right.
Hi, this is wonderful. And I would hope that some of us could have could continue this conversation together. Erica I would just love to spend time picking your brain. I've been working on these issues for a number of years here in Arlington. And now I'm chair of the Arlington Disability Advisory Commission, but I spent almost 10 years on the Planning Commission working specifically on universal design, only to find out after something was built. And I went back with the builders and the building code inspector and said, what happened to universal design? They said, it is universal design, only to realize the builders don't know what we're talking about. So I've started to break it down into no steps. One, build once, build for everybody. You know, the ramp isn't an afterthought. It needs to be an architectural feature. So those are some of the things that I would enjoy exploring with everybody. The thing I'm working on is when we have on-site affordable housing, to get them to put roll-in showers on them so people can age in place. We know that kitchens and baths are the leading cause of serious injuries for people as they age in place and people with disabilities. So these are some of the initiatives that I'm working on for my corner, but I would love to work together, you know, as a group. I think we'll be stronger if we work together on these very important projects where we are putting up more multifamily dwellings, and we are trying to get more affordable units. But doesn't mean that they are going to be still suitable for moving to aging in place. The other thing really quick, that when I was on Planning Commission, people would come in with these with these single family homes. I would try and sit with the builders. One, if it's a townhouse, to at least have it visitable from the back. Now, we're the only county in the country who got uniform, the type of architectural design that we have on Columbia Pike that will have visibility. It's the only county that was able to successfully get that. But to work with the builders, even if they're building a single family home, that people, if they had a kid who had a soccer injury and blew out his knee, they can't survive on the first floor. They're now putting in these little bathrooms down a stairwell. And, you know, I see there's just so many things, and whether or not we can change the building code from Richmond, because we're a Dillon state, it would go a long way because we're building less accessible things now. So that's my spiel.
For those
This is
insights.
wonderful.
and as somebody who has interacted with you over the years, are well aware of the need for showers and things like that. And so, you know, as we think about that, and part of it goes along, I think, with educating our developers. And, you know, someone has mentioned AHC. I mean, we do have nonprofit developers who we could be talking with more about doing senior accessible housing and things like that. You know, I'm really sorry that we are kind of out of time and probably needing to bring this to an end. And I didn't get, there's some questions I didn't get to, and you know, perhaps we can have those conversations, you know, offline sometime, and about how to promote this and what works and what doesn't work. And I'm sure this is just the beginning of this conversation. And, you know, as we, as the county moves forward with the plan and the planning, and I'm sure that we're going to have the opportunity to dive much deeper into this topic as the next year goes by. So any closing remarks, folks?
I would just thank you again to AHS for hosting this discussion and for all the good work that you all are doing, and for everyone on the line tonight. Thanks for taking the time to be a part of the conversation. And I think to Maureen's point, we have a long road ahead of us. But, you know, thanks to folks like Erica and many others, I'm sure we'll get there, but it's going to take all hands on deck to help us get ready for this future.
Ditto. I agree.
Yes, great. So you saw in the slide right before this that we have a list of resources. We will be sending out a link to the slides and the list of resources. After the event, you'll get sort of the automated one from Zoom, but next week we'll be following up with more of a summary post on our blog so that you'll be able to see all those resources. It was mentioned in the beginning, check out missingmiddlearlington.net for more information on the missing middle housing study and some pictures and the video and some other information. There'll be more and more being added there over time. We will do our best to see if we can answer all the outstanding questions as a part of our blog that we post next week. And we should keep this conversation going. So I really appreciate all of you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks again to all the panelists, as well as all the attendees who attended tonight. Thank you.